Live from the Shooting from the Lip studio in Louisville, Kentucky, it's the KT Unearthly Show with your hosts, Kevin Hale and Tiffany Mack.
What is up? Kevin Hale up in this Shooting from the Lip studio on this Friday night, September 30th, 2016. If it's Friday night, it's two things. One, it means that I have no life. Two, it means I get to hang out with Tiffany Mack and we get to do the KT Unearthly show. T-Mac, as I'm the only one that seems to call you that. What's up, lady?
Hey, I'm here. I'm present. I have been working diligently on this project that we're getting ready to endure this evening together. So, yeah.
This is this one is near and dear for us. Mm-hmm. Here's the best way to put it. If I say the NBA, National Basketball Association, what name would come to mind?
Mm-hmm. I don't
Cleveland.
know.
What's
Michael
the
Jordan?
Cleveland guy?
Michael
Jordan.
I don't know.
LeBron James. Right. You're
LeBron James. Okay.
NFL, National Football League.
I really don't do. I don't do all that crap.
Okay.
So
There's like,
really
let's say Tom Brady. Let's stay up north.
Okay.
Kind of with. And then if I say UFO researcher, who would you say?
Gosh, I can't. Let me think. Who would I choose? Probably maybe Richard Dolan.
You know, would
that work?
Yeah, I would. It's actually a coincidence because that is who we have as our guest tonight. So, yay.
What?
Yeah.
Surprise.
You pulled some strings and made tonight. Yeah, it's a boy. Before we journey off into our show tonight, let's plug our social media. You can find our show on iTunes and YouTube. Subscribe to those shows, please. Twitter at The Shooting Lip. Tiffany is at Tiffany Mac _ET. I'm at Kevin Hale 423. You can like us, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Shooting from the Lip and the KT Unearthly Show live tonight via BlogTalkRadio. Oops, I forgot. We're also on the SoundCloud and Stitcher apps. We're everywhere, any and everywhere. We have a very special guest tonight. We'll bring him on soon. But one thing we do to get the show started, Tiffany, is we do the TK foreplay. Tonight, I saw this article out there. I'm not going to go so much into the article, but there's been a lot of instances lately where researchers, different types of UFO researchers, scientists, have supposedly identified these radio sources, if you will, that's deep into space, some types of noise or vibes or sounds coming from space. And of course, ufology people will err to that it's potentially an extraterrestrial signal. People who've done investigations, some of these have turned out to be, they figured out what those sounds were, and they were not of extraterrestrial origin. But today's technology, China recently they have this, the world's largest telescopes, or that they're going to start pursuing the skies. What is your take when it comes to how technology driven where we're at right now? If there is something out there somewhere, we've got to connect, right? I mean, at this point, we've got the technology to billions of miles away, of how many ever light years away. Aren't we close to, if there is per se life in another galaxy or solar system, whatever? I mean, we've got to be able to connect to that.
Well, first of all, I think you just said a lot of words that really mean nothing when it comes to this quest that we're on, because I feel like we've already been initiated into this situation by ET. I think they've been here. I think they are here. I think that
two different things, though.
With
two different things.
I don't know because So they've
saying
noticed a strange
if there's another Earth
data.
out there.
Well,
if there's another Earth
out there, if there's like 10 billion trillion potentials out there, then it'd be stupid to say no. I think that we've already been contacted, and I think that science is a little bit maybe behind on this, and a little bit reluctant to give a final say. But this is a topic that our guests might be able to go into a little bit further. But there's been over the years, people have noticed like a bit of data coming through over the radio telescopes, and they might think that they've detected signals from extraterrestrial civilizations. But what happens if it's not? What happens if it's just I don't know. It's a big question, and it's one of those things that I think that there are people who have some of the answers, but we may never be given enough information by our scientists to really say yay or nay, unless they just come out and say, hey, we're here.
It probably begs
I don't know. I think
it probably begs to ask the question of all these telescopes, of all these devices that we have in place to detect said signal. How many of those are per se not controlled by some government entity or some?
Well, yeah, and then you have to wonder about human interference, including other like radio astronomers, radar reflected off the moon, television signals, orbiting satellites, and like even the possible effects from like large like metal buildings near the telescopes. I don't know.
No, I'm with you there. I do think, but I'm just thinking that technology by today's standards, what we were able to do, I think we can get past all those, those things that would have been deemed as, just some type of anomaly or just, some space debris or something. That's my take. Anyways, I think we beat that. So, without further ado, I'll give you the privilege of introducing our guest.
Okay. Well, Richard Dolan is among one of the world's most prominent UFO researchers, and I actually had the privilege to meet him at the Ozark UFO conference in April. And his speech, geez Louise, his speaking engagements are amazing, and a lot of them are on YouTube and on the internet all over the place. You see him on Ancient Aliens. You see him on all of these different channels, and he's not only a well-published author, but a very, very prominent figure within ufology, and somebody that we are seeing more of and listening to a lot more often. He is author of 2 volumes of history, UFOs and the National Security State, widely recognized as the Bible of modern UFO studies, and provides a multitude of research avenues for current and future scholars. Some of his best-selling authors or books have been really, really well-documented books about the politics and the science, and it's just masterful and important. He really has sort of taken the world by storm, and we are very, very privileged to have him on the show this evening to discuss some of these amazing topics.
Yes.
One of the things that he has coined was a term called the breakaway civilization, and I really would like to get into that and just sort of pick his brain on topics like this, and really delve into some other areas that he's been discussing lately. I know, Kevin, that you wanted to talk a little bit more about the historical aspects of ufology, but he's not just a historian. Richard is really just Okay. Okay, fine. Then let's just bring Richard on, since I'm like beating you down here with it. But
Lord
Richard, thank you so much. Yes, Lord Richard Dolan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Tiffany. Hi, Kevin. Thank you for having me on.
Hello.
It's a pleasure.
Hello, sir.
Thank you.
Pleasure's ours.
So, I know that you have been a researcher in this field for a very long time, and you've been part of the disclosure movement and bringing the information forward. But how exactly did you get involved with this? What brought you? What made you say, "Damn it, I just want to start writing about UFOs"?
It was a combination of personal desperation and absolute fascination and obsession. It was a little bit of both. The desperation came from the fact that I was in an academic program at the University of Rochester, where I just felt like I don't really know where I want to go in this academic world. I'd really become disillusioned with it, and I was studying Cold War history, Harry Truman and the Russians, and fascinating stuff, but in an environment that was not really, I have to say, I mean, I had been in the academic world my entire life. I thought that my life would be teaching history at some university. And in the early 1990s, I can tell you that going into the field of history was not as appealing as it had been when I started out years earlier, and I just didn't know what I wanted to do with the academic university side of it. And I became obsessed with UFOs. I was in a bookstore. I've talked about this a number of times. I saw a copy of Timothy Good's classic book, Above Top Secret, subtitled The Worldwide UFO Cover-Up. And I was like, oh, wow, this is interesting. Worldwide Cover-Up. Bought the book and jumped onto what was then the early internet. There was no web, but there were news groups, bulletin boards. And that was interesting. And the next thing I knew, I was absolutely, completely obsessed by this subject. And I still remember, I'll always remember spending nights in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out my new worldview. Like, if this is true, then what does this mean about our history? And all of these unresolved issues. And I didn't set out to write books on this subject. I set out to just resolve for myself what I thought about this. I didn't like having this unresolved question, in my mind. Are UFOs a situation? Are they a thing? Is this something that our society has taken seriously or not? And if they ever took it seriously, why did they take it seriously? It's a fair question to ask. And so that was what started me onto it. And I quickly realized that, oh, this is quite significant indeed. And the reason I realized that is very simple. As a historian, what did I want to look into? I wanted to look into confirmed historical documents. I wanted to see what is the actual evidence for claiming that there's a cover-up. What do these individuals state as their evidence? And it turns out that there's a very good wealth of data to work off of. In fact, there's thousands of pages of classified documents that have been released, but hundreds of pages of really first-rate, excellent documents that anyone can read at this point. And when I became aware of them way back in the 90s, I have to say, it really turned my head. And I thought, so there is a tremendous abundance of proof, not hints or suggestions, but actual proof that these objects of some sort have invaded sensitive airspace, were seen by military personnel looking in highly unconventional ways, like disc-shaped, doing incredible things that were not supposed to be possible, like zigzags and instant acceleration and silent maneuvering and so forth, and that they were taken seriously, which of course they would be. And it begs the obvious question, well, what were these things? Who was flying them? And guess what? The declassified record shows that U.S. intelligence was asking exactly that question. Who were these guys? And question number one is, what is it the Russians? Did the Soviets come up with something revolutionary? And the fact is, they didn't then, and we do not now have any evidence that the Soviets or the Russians came up with any flying saucers, so to speak. Second question that the U.S. analysts asked was, did we, in some the secret bowels of the American national security state, did they come up with something? And this is a trickier question because there are arguments to be made that, we had our own cache of Nazi scientists brought over after the war, and that is true. And some of them were interested in very unusual types of science and propulsion systems. And so the question is, were we building our own flying saucers? And this is an argument to this day, but my contention today, and certainly my contention back then in the 90s, was that it didn't really look like it. It didn't look like we really had a full-blown flying saucer program. Didn't mean that we weren't trying to. So, and then when you start looking at the evidence of this as a worldwide phenomenon going back actually prior to the 1940s, it goes way back, you start to ask yourself, what exactly are we dealing with? And that's what got me down this little rabbit hole. I thought I would get into this field for 2-3 months. Truly, that's really what I thought. And the next thing I knew, I was just sucked right in, and I'm still in. It's been more than 20 years, and I'm in for life. That's how I look at it. I find that this is the most fascinating subject that I could possibly have stumbled into. Some of my old academic colleagues thought, that I'd lost my mind. My goodness, going into UFOs, what's wrong with Dolan? I would say, guys, if you're out there, the joke's on you. I've actually gotten into the most fascinating subject imaginable, met some of the most brilliant minds imaginable while doing this, and certainly do not lack for fascinating things to be researching.
Yeah, that was one of my next. That was one of my questions coming up. Is we've had these conversations, Tiffany, with a guest who is maybe some historian, but I don't think we've ever asked the question, Richard, what is it like when you go back to say your a 10-year reunion? When your classmates are, talking about World War I, and you get to talk some cool stuff.
He gets to talk about Foo Fighters.
For the record, I'm actually really into World War I. In fact, this is no joke. Less than an hour ago, I was watching a little bit of a documentary about the First World War, just about 10 minutes worth. So I'm fascinated by that. I love history. But what is interesting, I haven't gone to a high school reunion in ages. I did go to my 20th quite a while ago. And that was shortly after my first book came out. I was a new author.
Cool.
And I think they were kind of interested in it. They thought it was kind of a cool thing. What I find is that I have get together with family reunions, for example. And I mean, I love my family. I've got wonderful relatives. I would say most of them are really they like the fact that I do what I do. And there are a few of them who are really into it, like in terms of the ideas. I think most of my relatives, I think when I first got into UFOs, they were thinking, that's a little unusual. What's wrong with him? But the thing about me is, in my family, it's always been well known that I do what I want. No one's going to tell me what to do otherwise, and that's the end of it. And so at this point, I've been doing this subject, studying it long enough that I think my family is actually very interested. My mother and father love that I do this. They're excited. They love seeing their son on the television History Channel or whatever else I'm doing. But for me, it's really about one thing. It's about pursuing this fascinating intellectual and personal subject, to be honest with you. I mean, think about it. We've got this life. Even if you have multiple lives, the thing is you don't know about those multiple lives. You only know about this life. And so why waste it by doing things that are not interesting? Why waste it by just kind of going through the motions? Why not really throw yourself into something that is just going to challenge you in so many ways? And the UFO subject, if nothing else, is ultimately just the most challenging subject. It causes us to rethink our history, our politics, our science, our understanding of ourselves.
That and religion are two of the topics I love to talk about.
Sure. Yeah. So it causes us to rethink all of those in a fresh way, I would say. And so what's not fascinating about that?
Tiffany, fascination.
It is, but, I feel that the whole idea of ufology, it's not a new subject. We have been enamored with extraterrestrials and UFOs since the time of cavemen. It's not a new topic. Yes, we had a new revival with Kenneth Arnold and, the more up-to-date common sightings of the discs, but it's not something that's ever been, it's not foreign. It's a topic of discussion for a long time. But so what type of evidence is there for a UFO cover-up?
Sure.
Do we have people that are just standing strong and saying it doesn't exist? Most of the time, it seems like it's our military that does that. But can you describe that a little bit more for us?
I would love to, Tiffany. Thank you. This is a really important question. So there's two ways to get into this. First is to ask, is there evidence of a UFO phenomenon? The answer to that is yes. And the kind of evidence that exists is in the form of a number of things. It's in the form of a lot of witnesses, obviously thousands and thousands of witnesses. But when we're getting into the idea of a cover-up, we have to look at this problem historically. So, in other words, we understand that this phenomenon of flying saucers kind of hit the scene publicly in 1947. You mentioned Kenneth Arnold. He was the pilot who saw the objects they described as like saucers skipping on the water. That caused the phrase flying saucer to be born. At that time, in the 1940s and through the 50s and through the 60s, the official position of the United States military, and to this day of the U.S. government, has been that there is no evidence of UFOs, that there is no evidence that they are anything other than misinterpretations of conventional objects. Back in the 1940s, the Air Force issued a press release where they said, all evidence and analysis indicate that these objects are misinterpretations or a form of mass hysteria, hoaxers, and people who are psychopathological. This is literally what the Air Force said. Today, just a few years ago, the Obama White House issued a statement that was really not much different, a little more PC in its language. But in 2011, the White House issued a statement after my colleague Stephen Bassett and issued a petition to get the White House to acknowledge this. And the Obama White House actually said the U.S. government has no evidence that any life exists outside our planet or that there are UFOs here. So there's been no change. Now, so that's the official statement, but why is there a cover-up? Well, I'll tell you why there's a cover-up. In the 1970s, we got very lucky as a society here in the United States. We got something that was known as the Freedom of Information Act, which actually had been passed way back in 1966, but it didn't have really any teeth in terms of public policy. In the mid 70s, the Freedom of Information Act was strengthened significantly so that it allowed for researchers like those who were interested in UFOs to petition government agencies for documents on all sorts of things. And a lot of UFO documents were released at that time. They were declassified. And then when Jimmy Carter became president just shortly after that, he strengthened the Freedom of Information Act, and he told federal agencies, you cannot jerk people around here, all right? You have to be reasonable, you have to be efficient, and you can't cost them an arm and a leg when they issue these requests. And as a result, there was an enormous amount of documents that came out at that time during the Carter years. In fact, I believe it's still the case, but at roughly half of all documents that we have to this day that were declassified on UFOs came from the Carter years.
Yes,
so thank you, Jimmy Carter.
But how many of those documents actually have legitimate information that you can read? It seems like a lot of the information is blacked out. Is that the case, or am I just imagining things? A
lot are blacked out, a lot are not blacked out. So it depends on how high the classifications go. If there's different levels of classification in the military. I think most listeners are probably aware of this. So you've got back in the 40s and 50s and in the 60s, with a lot of the documents that we get out from that period, there was the lowest level was called restricted, and then there was confidential, and then there was secret, and then top secret. And so of documents that were top secret, very few, almost none have come out. A very few top secret documents have come out, and most of those have been blacked out or redacted. Now, there's been a number of documents that were classified as secret, and they were very significant, and we have those. And we have a lot of others of lower classifications. And what we can piece together from all of these documents is that while the U.S. government was telling the public that, no, there's nothing to this is misidentification and so forth, in fact, the classified world tells us something absolutely, totally different. The classified world was having a completely different and grown-up discussion of this phenomenon, very unlike the spoon-fed nonsense that they were giving the public. So in the classified world, for example, there were documents that described unbelievable violations of airspace that, had they been leaked out at the time, I think people would have had, a real fit. There is one I got in front of me here from the Hanford Atomic Energy Commission plant that's in the state of Washington from the summer of 1950. And this is a short little memo. It says, since July 30th, 1950, objects round in form have been sighted over the Hanford plant. Air Force jets attempted interception with negative results. Oh, well, that's interesting. And then it goes on. It says, all units, including the anti-aircraft battalion, radar units, Air Force fighter squadrons, and the FBI have been alerted for further observation. Now, just, stop and pause for a second and ask, if this information had come out at that time in 1950, how do you think the American and world public would have reacted? Mm-hmm. Air Force jets attempted interception of round objects over one of our few nuclear plants. Nuclear technology in 1950 was a very big deal, and something was hanging out over that plant. And that's not an isolated case. So a lot of our documents describe these types of encounters. And so it's a very fair question to ask, if you're interested in UFOs as public policy, that this doesn't prove that UFOs are extraterrestrial, and I'm not saying it is proof. What I am saying is that this proves that the phenomenon was a serious matter to our responsible military authorities. And if it was a serious matter, we are obligated to ask, why did they consider it serious? Well, we can kind of infer a few things here. Like objects that don't look normal and don't behave normally are hanging out over classified sensitive airspace where they're not supposed to be. Yes, that's important. So when we get into these aspects of the UFO phenomenon, it becomes very evident that, yes, of course, there's a cover-up. And, there's another example of what I would say is a cover-up. I think I'm the one who found this. I don't think anyone found this before me. There was an oral history interview given by a retired general, a guy named Robert Landry, in the early 1970s, and I found it. I was doing some research for my first book, and Landry had given briefings for 4 years to Harry Truman when Truman was president. Landry happened to be Truman's Air Force liaison. And what he said, this is not long before he died, and shortly after Truman had died, Landry was just giving a kind of interview on his career. He had a very interesting career. And then this interviewer at the very end of the interview says, oh, and what about UFOs? And, you read the transcript of this, and I have links to it in my first book. Landry, you could tell, was actually very surprised by the question. And he says, oh, well, UFOs. And then he just puts it out there. He says, well, we actually were interested in that as well. And he said that he was brought into Truman's office in the summer of 1948 with the task of liaising between the Air Force and the White House with the CIA, and to provide UFO reports to the president on a quarterly basis. Now, that's just a little interesting fact. And Landry then later said, well, we didn't have any evidence of that UFOs are extraterrestrial, but we also didn't write any reports down, so I can't give you anything to look at. And what I've always known is that the first rule in keeping secrets is nothing on paper. Who really knows what was said? I know for a fact that there were some very, very traumatic UFO cases during the time that Landry was briefing Truman. I mean, I just read you a 1950 memo that would have been clearly one of the things that Truman was briefed on. So there was actually a lot to talk about. And we now know that the U.S. president was getting quarterly briefings on UFOs. That's not in Truman's memoirs. That's not in any official history book anywhere, but it happened. So it's reasons like this that I will maintain, yes, there's absolutely a cover-up. I mean, literally, in the sense that there's information, it's real, it's being repressed by the U.S. government back then and to this day.
Now, Richard, have you ever been at a conference or something where someone of the military or someone of the government or something is speaking, and they're, the way they're coming across is basically denying any evidence or incidents? Have you ever coughed and said bullshit at the same time?
Oh, we can say bullshit. Okay, that's nice to know here.
Yeah,
yes, absolutely.
Those 7 FCC words are allowed on this.
Yeah, we can say it all here.
Yes, to answer your question, Kevin, I absolutely have, and probably most prominently, I had an extended 3-hour radio debate with Army Colonel John Alexander a couple of years ago on, I don't even know if that radio station's around anymore, but I've done conferences with John. So John Alexander does not deny that there are UFOs. I mean, I don't think any military person, honestly, in a public venue would be that stupid to say that there's no events that have mystified them. Although, I guess there are such people. I've never met them. I've never met such hidebound people officially at a conference. Well, maybe that's not so true. With Alexander, though, his attitude, this is like the John Alexander, Nick Pope, Leslie Kean school of thought. So, like, he'll acknowledge that there is a phenomenon, that there are things that confuse, that are baffling. And he actually will go so far, I believe, as to offer an opinion that he believes that they are not from our civilization. I think he does say that. But he also says that there's no cover-up, which I've always found amusing. He says, the U.S. government's simply baffled by it, and there's no evidence that there's an organized program to study this. And that's what I call BS on that. And I had a debate with John I think it was in 2011, about this, like, is there a UFO cover-up? And I'll just say, despite the fact that I was absolutely sick as a dog that night, the room was spinning. I was so sick. I think I easily made my point against him. I would give myself a B for that debate, but I would give him a C-. So I would say that I made my point and he did. I did have a brief encounter with a couple of skeptics. Robert Schaefer is a very prominent skeptic in the field, and James McGahey, a very prominent skeptic as well. And informally, the thing that shocked me about both of those guys, actually, and I don't mind if they hear this, was how utterly ignorant and foolish they sounded, and how clear it was to me that they didn't know any UFO history whatsoever. That was worth knowing. I mean, I thought I was like talking to school children. I actually realized how ignorant the skeptical community is on this subject.
Okay, so there's a long established cover up. I mean, it's been a very, very long time that people are saying, "Oh no, it's not happening." No. What would actually have to happen for this stance to actually change?
That's a really good question. In other words, I wrote a book on this subject. I called it AD After Disclosure. How really was a 2-part book. What would disclosure be like to our society? How would it transform our world? But the first part of it was, how could it even happen? Not what would happen later, but how would it be possible? Mm-hmm. Now, that book, I co-authored it more than 5 years ago, and my mind on this is constantly going through an evolution. What I would say is that it's possible that there won't be. I mean, there are a couple of different disclosure scenarios that I now look at in this world of ours. I basically see 3 forms of disclosure. I see what I've come to call preferred disclosure, which is really not preferred by us at all. It's basically fascist disclosure. In other words, we're moving into a world right now that is, this is what globalization is about. It's the creation of a transnational, corporate-dominated world, mm-hmm. in which nations really don't matter anymore. And this is why, we're talking about the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and TTIP, the Transatlantic International Partnership, and a number of other agreements as well that are being shoved down our throats as we speak, and that will, in my view, take away the last vestiges of national self-rule. And we're moving into this world where people have no rights, they have no privacy, they have no ability really to fight the system and to protest against the system as well. Kind of a vision of total police state surveillance and control. That's happening. And mm-hmm. it seems to me that in such a world, there would be a plan for disclosure. And that this plan would only happen once those elites who are really running the show or want to run the show are confident that they have everything completely in hand. So if they feel that they have achieved a goal of total intellectual dominance over the global narrative, then they might roll out a highly selective and spin-laden version of disclosure. I do think that that's possible, and that's a real danger. I mean, think of it this way. The amount of data on the UFO phenomenon has got to be mountains and mountains worth of data. What we have gotten in terms of declassified information is, in my opinion, next to nothing. It's important. It proves that there's a cover-up, but it's a tiny amount. So the government, I say the government very loosely here, but any disclosing agency would have an enormous amount of information from which to disclose. And so, one way in keeping a secret is, as I said earlier, nothing on paper, but another way to keep a secret is to pretend to share it. So if you give away a little sliver of the information that you genuinely have, but you spin it in a certain way, you can still maintain control over this narrative. And this, I think, is a scenario we may be moving toward in the next generation or so, maybe within 20 years, a kind of a very dishonest disclosure. And I would add that if the United States does a disclosure, you better watch out. That's probably not the nation that you want to do a disclosure. I'd rather have any other nation than the U.S. do a disclosure, frankly. So then there are other forms of disclosure. Well, I can follow up on that in just a second if you'd like to hear why I think. But I think what would be in our interest is more of a people-driven type of disclosure. Now, disclosure can happen by accident. It can happen as a result of a political catastrophe, a crisis. Something leaks out unexpectedly, maybe a WikiLeaks type of a thing, or a mass sighting that just happens to be caught by multiple witnesses, multiple cameras, and it's just an undeniable event. It could happen. It hasn't, not sufficiently.
Well, we see videos all the time. We see images all the time. But when it comes to all of this information that's been leaked upon the internet world, you just don't know if it's frickin' Photoshop. You don't know what the hell it is.
Or lies. So there's images and video that comes out. There's no way to prove each one of these individually. I agree with you. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible moving forward. I'm not willing to say that. Like, I do agree. It's very difficult. There's a lot of video. Some of it's probably legit for all we know, but it's very difficult to prove it. And even the ones that are proven to be legitimate doesn't prove that they're anomalies. I mean, there's a lot of drones out there. There's a lot of other things out there now. But
not even just drones. Yeah. Now you have the U-2, the SR-71, the F-11-7A. We have all of these different types of secret craft that are emerging.
None of those are secret, but I take your point.
They're emerging into the public realm. They used to be secret, and now we're identifying some of these even triangular craft, which everybody seems to really be so awed by these days. And me coming from a military background with some very, very interesting aspects to that, we do see these on bases. We do see that they're prevalent.
Have you seen triangles on the military bases?
I've seen stuff around them.
I mean, I'm asking.
Come on,
seriously,
you can't go
black
on
triangles. No, you can't. So if black triangles are definitely, they're part of our world.
Yes,
someone is
they are.
Them and flying them.
Yes.
So I'll give you my opinion. I'd like to hear your information. My opinion is that
that will have to be on a private call.
What the hell?
Well, you're kind of spilling beans now.
Oh my God, Tiffany!
Jimmy Church did this to me once, and I called him out on that too. Jimmy
call
once said
to me,
out. Well, Richard, I have some speculation that there's going to be a kind of limited disclosure in the near future. And I said, Jimmy, it really sounds like you got some information there that you don't want to share, which of course was the case. And Tiffany,
so there's been thousands of these triangular crafts. Okay, there's been thousands of these triangular crafts sighted, and
absolutely.
When they're sighted, people get pretty disturbed. They think, "Oh my God, there's a UFO! I just saw it. It was hovering. It was quiet. It had lights, but it looked sort of rectangular or triangular." But we have these. We have these. These are not UFOs. There may be some UFOs in these shapes as well, but they are incredible craft that are very, very dynamic in the way that they move.
Isn't that reverse engineering from supposedly back in the day?
Well, that's what I was wondering. Is this something that we have back engineered You know, we've had craft down since like the 1890s.
Texas.
Well, if you're thinking
Maybe.
of the Aurora, Texas incident, that's
Correct.
That's
not a myth, is it?
No, but it's also not really
They
proven.
never talk about the aircraft.
So-
they always have the
Okay.
eye.
Okay, you're getting in. Okay, proven or not
it
proven?
could be spurious. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the
Proven
Aurora
or
case is
not proven? Proven or not proven, Richard? These are the things that muddy the waters.
right. So let's get into the triangles a little bit. And you didn't answer if you've seen one, by the way. Did you ever see a triangle craft at a military base?
I have.
So
Yes,
what year,
the answer is yes.
What year?
It was probably 2002, 2002,
Okay, so
2003.
it was a perfectly triangular craft, like an absolute, like a triangle.
With a little bit rounded edges.
Okay. Well, yes, that's very interesting.
It's pretty detailed.
Why is that? I mean, do you want me to draw it for you?
Officially speaking, there are no triangles. Now, there are some triangular-ish craft that are beginning to be rolled out a little bit officially. But no, I mean, officially speaking, like a perfect triangle with either round or sharp edges, no. Now, but it's true. Like, I agree. Like, the U.S. black budget community has been building them. But I would just mention in this context, there's a book that I published. I'm not the author, but I'm the publisher of a fantastic book on triangular UFOs by David B. Marler. And I would recommend, if anyone's interested in triangular UFOs, this is really the best single book-length study that's been done on them that I'm aware of. And David, it's called Triangular UFOs. The estimate of the situation, triangular UFOs. And his contention is that this triangle UFO phenomenon actually goes back farther than many people realize, that there were triangular UFOs being seen even toward the beginning of the flying saucer era. There were always a certain number of UFOs that were seen as triangular. There were definitely a major upsurge in perfect triangular UFOs by the 1960s and then big time in the mid-70s. Now, it's possible that by the 70s we were making them. It's a really valid question to ask, were we making them in the 60s? I don't know. Some of these triangular UFOs have been associated with very high strangeness, transformation of the atmosphere. People's mental state get affected by these things, just like they do with ordinary UFO sightings. So my opinion, and this is only my opinion, is that yes, we're making some, and we're not making some others. And a real question to ask is, what's the mission of the ones that we're making, since they're not being seen in any of the endless wars that the United States is waging on the rest of the world? So where are they being used? My suspicion is that they're being used off-world. I mean, after all, if the UFO subject is this, yeah, I mean, why not? This is where we get into a breakaway civilization.
Okay.
Well,
yes,
I like that.
but you're suggesting that this is part of the secret space fleet, correct?
Yes, I guess I am.
Okay. Well, let's get into that. Let's discuss the secret space program a little bit. What are the things that you have found in your studies into this subject?
Okay,
very good question. Again, I like your questions. I actually really appreciate these. These are really thoughtful.
I'd like to ask some questions eventually, Tiffany.
Later, Kevin. Tiffany.
Bye, Kevin.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're both wonderful.
Wake me up before you go. Isn't that a song? Anyways, go ahead.
So I want to say this about the secret space program. I believe that there is one. I am much less persuaded by some of the so-called whistleblowers who are out there today talking about it. Although I will just say I'm not out explicitly to debunk them all, but I also have not yet gone to the point where I think that some of the recent people talking about their secret space program, like their experiences on Mars and elsewhere, I don't yet believe that those are true. I'm not willing to say, oh yeah, I think that's true. Having said that, I do believe that there are some other leakers who aren't much more credible. People like Carl Wolf, people like Donna Hare, even people like, no one really remembers this guy, but Vito Saccheri. I can talk about some of these. These are people going way back who've talked about their encounters with a secret space program and evidence thereof. I'm even a fan and a believer in legitimacy of Gary McKinnon, who out of the UK got into the website of U.S. Space Command and found what does look like evidence of the space program. But like Carl Wolf, for example, he's talked very explicitly for years. When he was back in the 1960s with the Air Force, he had a top secret crypto clearance with Tactical Air Command at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, and he was assigned what he thought was a NASA facility. It was actually an NSA facility to do some equipment repair. And there he talked with another airman about how we were getting images from the lunar orbiter back to Earth. This is in 1965. The guy says, oh, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And Wolf, he talked about this many times. He says, I actually got scared because I knew I wasn't cleared for this information. But the man still pulled out a mosaic showing the base, which had all these geometric shapes and towers and spherical buildings and something like radar dishes, very large structures. And it kind of really frightened Wolf, and he didn't talk about it for years, but then started talking about it around the year 2000. Donna Hare was another one. She had a secret clearance working for a NASA subcontractor called Philco Ford. And in the early 1970s, not much later than Carl Wolf's experience, she said she was shown a satellite photo of a picture with a distinct UFO. Her colleague explained to her that it was his job to airbrush all the UFO evidence out of photographs before they were released to the public. And then she heard information from other employees at the Johnson Space Center, and this is secondhand, but still, this is Donna Hare's testimony, that some astronauts had seen extraterrestrial craft on the moon. And she said this, and her statement was, she said she believed that there was 3 of them on the moon when they landed. I assume she was talking about Apollo 11. Mm-hmm. And she mentioned that the code word for ETs was Santa Claus. And this has come up many, many times. So now Donna Hare is not talking about a secret space program. As a matter of fact, neither was Carl Wolf. Those two are simply talking about evidence of presumably extraterrestrial bases on the moon or in space or whatever. However, this is where I feel we need to have a right perspective. If you assume that NASA and the U.S. military was aware of ETs in space and on the moon back in the 60s and 70s, by definition, they're going to have a secret space program. They're going to need a clandestine way to examine any evidence. How are they going to do that? You're going to have a secret component to your space program that in some way or another is going to have to interact with that reality, and will have to do it in a way that is removed from the public. So in my view, I'm absolutely satisfied by the evidence that shows that we have been aware in the classified world that there is a presence of an other in orbit and on the moon.
Well, back in 2014, China actually released some photos of the backside of the moon, and it showed structures. So I'm wondering if that was more of a reality than some kind of just bullshit post. What do you think about actual images coming from China?
Gosh, I wish I could have Googled this like right now, and given my. I mean, is it wrong for me to Google this right this second and find out?
No, go right ahead. I'll send it to you. Hold on, let me find it.
Matter of fact, we want to hear you type. We want to hear you type as well as talk.
Apply keyboard. So there you go. Images for China 2014 moon photo UFOs. What I just typed in here. Let's pull this up. That's interesting. It's like very geometric indeed. So anyone should just Google this.
Right. Absolutely.
It's funny. I mean, since 2014, this is what is just proof that, like, no matter how much of a UFO fanatic you can be, things slip by me because I've been studying basically geopolitics and false flags for the past 2 years. I'm doing a book on that subject right now, not a UFO book.
Yeah, but China is so quiet. China is so quiet and very protective of their information. So that sort of puts up a red flag for me going, why would they do this? Why?
Well, the thing that I would want to investigate, and I don't know how reliable some of these pictures, like some of these pictures are clearly not physical.
Right.
I'm looking through them. They're clearly, like, one is of an obvious swastika.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So survey says, I don't believe that. There's one, I just don't. There's one that looks like almost like an ET face. Survey says, but there's one here that looks like a geometric pattern of lights, and that one I want to look into. We have to keep in mind, this one's on Disclosed TV, which is they're a pretty big site. What I would do with all of these is what is known as a reverse image search. And I would then search it chronologically. What I would like to do is find the very first instance of any of these evidences coming out. And with that, you can find out what is the original website where it came out. It's like what I'm saying is if the original website is some really bizarre website that you never heard of before or since, I'd be very suspicious.
Well, and isn't that part of the problem with like like wading through all of the disinformation that is on the internet?
Yeah, it's a real problem.
It is.
It's a major. It's not just with UFOs. This problem exists with everything. Everything people learn about. I mean,
all right, Richard. With that said, which sites do you endorse when it comes to ufology information? What's your go-to?
Good question. Yeah, but I like UFOevidence.org. I'm a very big fan of that one. In fact, I'm going to pull that one up right now. I like it because here we go. Yes, it's still up. I go to it fairly regularly. I like UFOevidence.org. It's subtitled "The Scientific Study of the UFO Phenomenon and the Search for Extraterrestrial Life." I like it because it's very low key. It's very comprehensive. It's an excellent jumping off point for the history, the cases, the sighting reports. I like it very much. I've liked it for years. In terms of contemporary reports, I'm a very big fan of the National UFO Reporting Center run by Peter Davenport. Now, it has to be said, Davenport does not personally investigate most of the sightings there, but he does follow up on some. But it's a good raw database to give people an idea of just what people are seeing. Like today, like in your neighborhood, there's stuff going on all the time. I go to the UFO Chronicles website. I typically read that, even though I don't agree with every opinion that I see on there, but I think there's good information there. I have a news reader, actually, that I should pull it up. And I go through certain UFO sites all the time. Right now, I'm kind of low-key on the UFO news, to be honest with you. It's not at the forefront of my thinking these days. The forefront of my thinking is looking into covert ops, regime change, color revolution, false flags. That's the subject of my current research book. And when that book is done, I'll go back and I'll wrap up volume 3 of my historical study of UFOs in the national security state. It's been waiting long enough.
So tell us a little bit about these false flags.
By all means. One thing I would want to point out to people is that long before I got into UFOs, I've always been studying history and politics. That's like the story of my life. And then through that, I got into the UFO field from that vantage point. And my UFO studies has always been essentially political by its nature, studying the politics of the cover-up. Looking at the international aspects of the cover-up nowadays is a big thing that I do. But yes, I decided about 2 years ago at this time that I wanted to throw myself into the subject of false flags. It just grabbed hold of me, very much the way that the UFO subject grabbed hold of me a little over 20 years ago. So my take on false flags is that there's a lot of them. We live in an era of them, that the U.S. is the leader in conducting false flags, followed by its strategic allies, Israel and Britain. Other nations get involved in the game as well. Canada they do their share of them against their own population, in my opinion. Europe. And the question is why? Why is the U.S. and not Russia? Because there's very little evidence that Russia is doing false flags. And I started to really understand this subject analytically. Why is this the case? And I have my own very worked out theory at this point as to why the United States is perpetrating false flags on the world. And they're doing it because, first of all, they're able to. Russia's not able to. North Korea is not able to. Iran is not able to, because one of the key components in being able to do false flags successfully is that you have to have domination over global world media. The U.S. has it. Russia does not. So if Russia were to do a false flag or to try to do one, it would fail because they don't have control over the global narrative. Like no one would believe it, in other words, or people would be much more inclined to challenge them. The U.S., however, is able to dominate nearly completely all Western media and intimidate those other nations that are not in the Western media system, like Russia and China. Now, that may be changing in the near future, but right up until now, the U.S. has really had its way. So you have to have domination over global media to make these false flags work. But the reason the U.S. is doing them is really twofold. I mean, it ultimately has to do with control over the emerging global system. All right. So, I talked a little earlier that the U.S. is essentially leading the lurch into a kind of a global totalitarianism. And I know that sounds like a strong phrase, but I'm not saying it lightly. The U.S. is doing this essentially because of globalization. So what globalization is doing is it's causing economic disruption at home, loss of jobs at home, and so domestically speaking, what the U.S. has decided it has to do, since it can't overtly just say we're bringing you a fascist dictatorship, people, because that won't go over very well. So what you have to do is you have to frighten the people into submission. And, false flags are the ultimate tool in the toolkit. There's other forms of propaganda that are used that are not as extreme. Just basic media control and spin do a really good job at this. But when we need stronger measures, false flag comes in very handy. It's the ultimate traumatic event. It's ruled by trauma. And, during the late 1990s, there were a lot of protests in the U.S. that were actually becoming a real hassle for the ruling elite. And they were all anti-globalization protests, like most prominently in Seattle in 1999, which involved the entire shutdown of that city when the World Trade Organization met to convene and was ready to enact some really nasty decisions that were going to take more jobs away, which they ended up doing. But in the meantime, the people of Seattle shut that city down for 4 days. Tear gas did not work. Pepper spray did not work. This is when people realized that they had rights. And, a year and a half later, the hammer came down in the form of 9/11 and the USA Patriot Act, which was shoved down our throats, which torched the U.S. Constitution. Let's just put it out there because that's what happened. And ever since then, people have learned to duck their head and not speak up so much because not a good idea. So that's one reason for false flags. The other reason for false flags is internationally, that the U.S. has to maintain what is known as the petrodollar system, and this requires domination over oil producers primarily. When oil producers get out of line and they start selling their oil in currency other than dollars, like Saddam Hussein back in 2000, when he started selling his oil in euros, because he was really ticked at the U.S. over the Persian Gulf War, the U.S. took that as a real threat. And the U.S. had to take them out, and they had to make up the fictitious claim of weapons of mass destruction and voice that whole lie on people, which they succeeded in doing, which, by the way, one of our presidential candidates was absolutely really into. Hillary Clinton was gung-ho on voicing that lie on the American public. Gung-ho.
Which pisses me off to no end.
Well, it resulted in the destruction.
Come on, this is not a political show. Come on.
It can be.
Well,
no,
it is right now.
It's not going to be. It is right. Fine.
No.
I have zero say in this show tonight.
I'm going to talk about this until I'm done. But
yes.
I'm just saying, because what you have is a system. It's important that people understand this, Kevin. And I'm not here to promote one candidate over the other. They're both military ass kissers, and I don't like either of them for that reason. Yes. But I will say that one of them is a true dyed-in-the-wool neoconservative. That's Hillary Clinton. She's Dick Cheney wearing a pantsuit. That's what she is. There's no difference. In other words, they are both all about maintaining U.S. empire through domination of the petrodollar system, which requires domination over the oil producers, which requires lies to the world, because they can't come out and say these things openly. And I'm coming back to the false flag thing here. You make up lies, you make up fictitious problems. And they did the same thing, by the way, with Muammar Gaddafi a couple of years later in 2011. They lied and said he carpet bombed his population. There's no evidence for this whatsoever. But Gaddafi was about to roll out a gold-based currency that was going to be a serious threat to the U.S. dollar. And so the U.S., to maintain its empire, had to take him out. They're doing the same thing, by the way, in Syria, which is one of the greatest crimes of the 21st century, and Americans have no idea what the U.S. government is doing in their name. This is horrific. But the point is, it's the U.S. empire abroad and domestic empire at home that requires these false flags to the extent that they do them or need them. They don't always need false flags to get what they want, but they need them sometimes, and they'll do it. And you know, the sad thing, the thing that breaks my heart when I look around at the United States and really the world, but especially the U.S., is how little Americans really understand the nature of what their government has become. It's not the government of your sixth grade civics class, you know, where you're taught, oh, well, I elect my member of Congress, and we have checks and balances, and if we don't like them, we can throw the bumps out.
It's a bunch of crap too. But that leads into the question of who controls the media and the information on UFOs and ETs, and it goes beyond. It goes beyond the petrodollar. It goes beyond that.
Government, right? Exactly.
Yeah, but why? Why?
U.S. government is a tool.
Why do we give them that power?
Well, they have it because they own everything, and
because they buy it.
We don't have a say.
If you look,
we should. But you know what? It goes back to even Fox and CNN and all that bullshit. I almost always listened to Al Jazeera. I feel like Al Jazeera seemed to be a little bit more.
They're on the outside looking in. Yeah. Yeah.
It is. It really was. Yeah. It was, you know, yeah. I heard both sides of all of the crap that was going on in America through Al Jazeera, through their eyes. And I felt that it was a little truer. Is that still the case?
Check.
I agree with that thought. Al Jazeera is.
Hold that thought.
I will hold that thought.
Hold something. This is where Tiffany, we are trying to incorporate that little bump in the show where I go, in this case, tonight, we didn't want LeBron James. We didn't want Tom Brady. We wanted Richard Dolan to be on our show. So that's who's on our show right now. UFO researcher. He's the effing king of UFO researching. He is on our show tonight. Richard, please continue. Yes, he's the man.
Thank you, Kevin. That just warms my heart. I think there are some other resources that might want to take issue with what you just said, but hey, we'll just leave it out there.
All right.
So Tiffany was asking, all right, so who's running it? What I would say is the U.S. government and the U.S. military are really nothing more than tools for global financial elites at this point. So the U.S. military is a highly coveted weapon because it's the most ass-kicking military in the world, and everyone wants the opportunity to control the policy of that military for their benefit. What the U.S. military has always done, really since World War II, is to use its power, its awesome power, to ensure domination of the major corporations and banks of the world. This is what the CIA has always done too, by the way. The CIA was founded really by Rockefeller money. One of the earliest directors of the CIA, we have Wild Bill Donovan, but then you have Allen Dulles. Dulles was a Rockefeller lawyer for years. His brother, John Foster Dulles, was Secretary of State under Eisenhower. They were all Rockefeller men. And the U.S. policy at all times, back in the 40s and 50s and 60s and right up to this day, has always been to promote the interests of the most powerful financial interests in the face of the earth. That is why the United States is promoting such a blatantly globalist policy that has destroyed and is, assaulting the middle class. But these people don't care. So to answer your question, who's running policy? I don't think anyone is silly enough to believe that the U.S. president is actually the guy or the gal running the show anymore. Not really. They're selected. They're not elected. They're part of they're sales reps for Brand America, for Brand Global. That's what their job is. And by the way, they're all really good at what they do. Not just Barack Obama, but George W. Bush was great at what he did. People may have hated him, but he was very successul. After all, it was under George W. Bush that the U.S. stole $30 trillion worth of oil under the ground in Iraq, sold that oil off to multinationals, many of which aren't even American companies. Thanks, guys. Americans paid with their lives, and they made the Iraqis pay with their lives, destroyed their country, and left depleted uranium that will be there for all time, leading to birth defects and just ruining. But the people who run U.S. policy, they're not even all American. They're just international money. And that's just how it goes. These are the people who, the elites at the Bilderberg meetings and those types of individuals have the dominant influence over U.S. policy. If you look at who are the two most prominent ancient men running U.S. global geopolitical policy, you've got Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski. Henry Kissinger has been associated with the Republican Party. Zbigniew Brzezinski has been associated with the Democratic Party. Brzezinski was just recently Obama's national security guru, basically. Well, both of those men have always worked for David Rockefeller their whole lives. And David Rockefeller is almost 100 years old. He's still alive. These Kissinger, Brzezinski, they're all getting very old now. But that system, I guess what I'm saying is their policies are identical. Kissinger and Brzezinski's have always been identical. So when you look at the grand geopolitics, that's all run by Rockefellers. The very phrase New World Order is a Rockefeller phrase. I first found this phrase, it's in a book from 1975, 15 years before George Herbert Walker Bush used the phrase in a speech. And that in a book about the Rockefellers that I have a copy of, talked about the four Rockefeller brothers, Winthrop, Nelson, David, and Lawrence, using a particular phrase to describe the world that they envisioned. That phrase was the New World Order. So clearly, and George Bush Sr. was always working for the Rockefellers. So what I'm saying is that U.S. policy is dominated by big money, whether it's Rockefeller or whether it's Rothschild or who knows. But it's the big banks.
Okay, I have a question about this, and this is something that I proposed to Grant Cameron as well. But do we have a reason to believe that every one of our U.S. presidents are read into the UFO topic?
Well, Grant, and I love and respect Grant, but I think I have a difference of opinion with him on this matter.
I have a feeling you do too.
Yeah, I do. And so Grant really knows a lot about U.S. presidential policy vis-a-vis UFOs. Guy lives in Winnipeg. He's Canadian, and he's better than any American researcher on U.S. presidents and UFOs. And he's done excellent work on this. So you have to respect his opinion. But I still disagree with his opinion. So his opinion is that U.S. presidents are read in, and U.S. presidents do have operational authority over this, and that the buck stops with them. And he's basically said this many times. And I don't agree with that. I respectfully disagree. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm right. I have my own reasons for thinking this. I look at the U.S. presidency outside of the UFO phenomenon, first of all. So forget UFOs and just look at the presidents. And we know absolutely that the president does not participate in the vast majority of covert ops that exist, black budget programs, special access programs. Not only does the president not know or not participate, but the president doesn't really know. There's no evidence that the president knows about this. I mean, when you look at, there's hundreds, there may be thousands of classified black budget programs that are going on right now within the U.S. labyrinthian black budget world. How is it possible that a president is going to be apprised of all of them when he's got to run for re-election? He's got to shake hands of dignitaries. He's got to be on TV. He's got to read the teleprompter. He's got to kiss the babies.
And he's only there for 4 years with the potential of 8.
Exactly. I had a long conversation on a number of occasions with a retired CIA official, a very brilliant man. I've talked about this a number of times. This is a man who used to give briefings to President Ronald Reagan on a regular basis. He was way up there, and a super intelligent man. And of course, having access to him, first question I asked was, how much do presidents know? Just what you're asking me. I asked him.
I think it's pretty damn important. I mean, the leader of the free world.
What we want to know is how broken is the system, essentially. And his answer to me, and I think he was truthful, was he said some have known more than others. He said, and exactly what you were implying, Tiffany, he said, look, presidents come and go. Some are reliable, some are not.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he said some are substance abusers, and that was when George W. Bush was president, and very clearly he was referring to George W. Bush. But he said some are just not reliable, and he said, the lifers, they're there to stay, and they run the program. But then he mentioned Jimmy Carter. He said knew. Ronald Reagan knew. George Bush Sr. knew. He said Bill Clinton, he did not believe knew. This man was out by the time Clinton came around, so he doesn't know firsthand. But he keeps his finger in the pie. He's absolutely connected to this day. And he said he did not believe Clinton knew, and he certainly did not believe George W. Bush was apprised fully. Now, this was before Obama. I don't know what he thinks about Obama or what he may know. But I think, we had another leak that came out that was attributed to John Andrews. He told a man that I know, Bill McDonald, who's still around. John Andrews, was a good friend of the late Ben Rich, who ran Lockheed Skunk Works. So he was very close to Ben Rich. And what Andrews said is that control of the UFO cover-up devolved away from the office of the presidency in 1969 during the Nixon administration, and it went international. That doesn't mean that the president is irrelevant, but the implication was that the president of the United States was only one factor in managing this whole secret. I find that to be logical. It makes sense to me. The U.S. military is still the most powerful military on the planet. It is essential that its structure kind of provides an umbrella for managing this, I would say. But no, the control, I think, is beyond U.S. military and U.S. government. That's my opinion. Grant has his own opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is that, we just don't know right now. I mean, we just don't. I don't know any better than he does, or anyone else, or you or anyone else listening.
Okay, so let's take this in a different direction for a second, since you only have a few more minutes to be with us. But Kevin and I live in the Bible Belt. So we tend to run up against people who fear this topic. And many science fiction movies over the past 20 years seem to have conditioned people in this generation to accept aliens as demons from outer space. I mean, I've heard many people claim that if there are ETs coming to us and contacting us, they must be trying to purposely deceive us and lead us astray.
Right.
So do you find that there is a supernatural element to the ETs and UFOs phenomenon? And if so, is it rooted in our knowledge of religion?
I'm really enjoying these questions. So the idea, this is, right out of the book of Revelations, where you talk about, the principalities of the powers of air being presented. And there are many very intelligent analysts. I want to point this out, very strong Christian analysts of the UFO phenomenon who make this argument that the UFO phenomenon is, in fact, demonic.
Right.
And that you can read the Bible and it's right there.
Is it demonic right there, or is it angel right there?
Well, so my attitude is I respect some of these analysts. I think some of them, it's very easy for a non-Christian, and I am a non-Christian, by the way, and it's very easy for a non-Christian to dismiss this. All right, but I don't dismiss.
Oh, Kevin.
I don't know anyone's religious belief here, but I don't subscribe to that opinion. In other words, I don't subscribe to the interpretation that what we're dealing with is demonic entities out of the Bible. I do think that there's a lot of strangeness to the UFO phenomenon, great strangeness, and that does involve a spiritual component in the sense that, people time and again are having encounters with entities that presumably are not human, and that there's a kind of very strange telepathic communication going on here. Now, that's I wouldn't say that's exactly supernatural, but we're kind of inching toward there. Then there are instances of these beings appearing, disappearing. Maybe that's supernatural, maybe that's not. And when we talk about what is supernatural anyway, that's sort of a loose definition, kind of a fuzzy statement. I mean, technically speaking, strictly speaking, there's no such thing as supernatural. Everything is natural. I think it's just we don't understand some of these things. I believe personally in a kind of a spiritual existence, but that doesn't make it non-scientific. It just makes it a point of my speculation. I guess what I'm saying is when you're dealing with Christians and their resistance to the UFO phenomenon, I don't really know what you're asking me. I don't really know what to say. I mean, there are people who are very strongly religious, and they're never going to change their opinions on this. Mm-hmm. They're never going to look at this.
Delusional to me. It's delusional to me. Just saying.
It's a form of mind.
It's a cult. It's a form of cult. Yeah, exactly. It's Jim Jones. It's Charlie Manson. It's
no. Unfortunately, we had
2,000 years ago.
Unfortunately, we had these people who took this little bit of knowledge to the extreme and decided to do something absolutely horrific.
To put the fear in people. That's what religion is.
Well,
it's not a good thing. It's to put fear. We're digressing here, but finish your statement because I've got some things I want to throw at Richard.
Well, I don't know how much more I can really say. I mean, I'm not sure there's a lot we could say about this, and Christianity and UFOs. It's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, there is a Christian interpretation of this, and I don't agree with the fundamentals because I don't agree with the basic premise of Christianity. I mean, I just don't. I don't. So, I mean, I don't believe in, I guess, what I would call the storybook version of Christianity. There are esoteric traditions of all of these major faiths, and those are a lot more interesting. But I guess, I don't subscribe to a literalist interpretation of the Bible, nor any more than I would subscribe to a literalist interpretation of the Quran or any other religious book. So I wouldn't think that it would be wise to interpret UFOs through a literalist interpretation of the Bible.